Welcome. On behalf of Professor Rosemary Howard from the AGSM at the University of New South Wales and myself, Peter Shergold from the Centre for Social Impact, welcome to what I think is going to be a wonderful evening. The Centre for Social Impact, CSI, you have probably heard, is a collaboration between three universities: the University of New South Wales, Melbourne University and Swinburne University of Technology, a collaboration between the business schools in each of those three universities, a collaboration which is designed to present socially responsible business management. So at CSI, our interests are in the capacity of not-for-profit organisations, the development of social enterprises, the latest thinking on corporate social responsibility and sustainability, philanthropy and social investment, and in particular, social innovation. This evening could not have been possible without the partnership of the Hunger Project, headed in Australia by Kathy Burke. It's a wonderful, wonderful social enterprise which promotes better nutrition, improved access to education, family health around the world, particularly working through women in Africa, in Latin America and in Asia. And they are hosting a visit to Australia by Her Excellency Dr. Speciosa Wandira, who is our guest speaker this evening. Dr. Wandira is a very special and honoured guest. I had the privilege of seeing her presentation a couple of nights ago. Following that, I thought she is really a shining light of hope and compassion. She's a medical doctor, studied at Makerere University in Kampala, and then between 1994 and 2003 served as the Vice President of Uganda. In that position, she advocated in particular on behalf of women and the elderly and those with disabilities. Now she is the chair of the Africa Women Committee on Peace and Development. In the past, she's been awarded the Ceres Medal by the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. She's been African Woman Entrepreneur of the Year. I can think of no one better to speak to us this evening on social leadership, leadership for social impact. Please welcome Dr. Speciosa Wandira.
Thank you very much, Peter. I think now that I'm standing where you've been standing and your name is Peter, which means rock, I think I'll be solid. I want to thank all of you for being here this evening. I have 15 minutes to show how enterprising I am, and here I go. When you actually get into a country and don't know the terrain, and you want to do something, then the chances are that your enterprise will be meaningless to the people in that environment. In Africa, before colonialism, the society was organized in particular ways to meet the needs of the people in Africa. I'll give specific reference to Uganda, because the kingdom that engaged proactively with the people who came to discover the Nile, the man was called Stanley. He came and said, I have discovered the Nile. And the people of my tribe had told him, you know, for us we know this is Dagali, this is where the ancestors, you know, came and then they moved with the people towards the north. And every time he would speak English and they say, Naire, Naire. So he said, oh, this is the Nile. This is where the Nile. I'm saying this because right now in the modern world, you find places where white people are is where there is development. Where white technology is, white technology follows that technology, and enterprise follows that. When you look at America, when the Chinese started going in large numbers to America, the Chinese language was not an issue. Now, every student wants to learn Chinese. Bush went and innovated war, the old Bush, in the Middle East. Now the Arab language is an enterprise in America. So if you know how to speak Arabic, it's business for you. For Africa, entrepreneurship started there in the way of the starting of the human race, so the archaeologists tell us. But so did adventure, because those of us who stayed in Africa were probably comfortable with the status quo. And those that were enterprising moved out. Now, in our, many sayings in many tribes, we say, if you don't know where you have come from, you will certainly get lost. So in Africa, we were organized as textile manufacturers, we were organized as blacksmiths, we were organized as cooks. People who had big muscle were responsible for clearing the field every time there was a field to be cleared, and then we leave nature to take care of itself. So we migrated from place to place. The Ngoni migrations of people who moved from Central Africa went right down up to Zimbabwe. So you find that because you people don't know much about Africa, you say that we are a very diverse people. We are less diverse than the Europeans. We are less diverse than the Chinese, because we have only 6 language groupings all linked to each other. You talk about Omuntu and Ubuntu in Chad. You go down to South Africa, you will still find people being called Omuntu. And to us, Ubuntu means being humane, acting in a dignified manner. And if you are not humane and dignified and didn't believe in yourself, nobody would think that whatever you innovate will actually be of use. Because whatever is innovated and whatever is put towards the use of the community should be towards enhancing the humanity of those particular people. The other groupings that are linked to the nomadic, the pastoralists, they also had their own culture. In that if you actually were a cattle person and reared fish or ate fish, it was taboo. Because you eat fish in that culture, then all the cows will die. And this actually brought in the issue of specialization. So you now go to Rwanda and you want to innovate new products, new technology, people who speak the same language. And some of you at one time, I'm saying you because we say in my tribe, meaning if you have a cow and it goes defecating all over, all the cows that belong to that herd will be quarantined because they all go on soiling the king's palace. Because you are all white. I'm just saying you people. So you find you go to Rwanda, and some of us keep on sitting and watching that Rwanda let the Hutus have their own country, and yet let the Tutsis have their own country. That's like saying let the engineers in Australia be in Victoria State, or let the doctors be in another state. It was all modes of production which were meant, and to me it was innovative, because they encouraged specialization, interdependence, and they hinged on the needs of the people in Africa. Now, because those of us who were not so smart remained there, were not adventurous to move towards the cold regions, you came back and said, because you knew we were really the engine of energy, and you took us as slaves. And whatever we had was called primitive. Our medicines are called witchcraft. Our textiles are, many people think Africans live in trees. Like I went to China and, the kids were touching me and they say monkey, monkey, or bananas. Then, everybody thinks you come from Africa. There are no houses, there's nothing. So that mentality has actually led to the destruction of innovativeness in Africa. But it is to the detriment of everybody. Because if you only have innovative ideas within your own kind, then you are not an entrepreneur. You are not an entrepreneur because you are just reinventing the wheel. Where is the continent where innovativeness and entrepreneurship is going to be tested? It is where you all originated, and that's Africa. I'll give you a small story of what happened after the pre-colonial times and colonialism. Colonialism, we grew cotton. We grew coffee, as we continue to do, and send it to you. Because if you live in the heat of Africa, why should you dress? I see all of you in the summer, you are half naked. So you live in Africa, why? There was no need for us to have clothes, except in the areas where mosquitoes were really abundant, and this was mainly around the lakes and along the tropical belt. So that's where you find people actually innovated cloth. But if you don't dress up, in fact, sometimes we look at you in the summer and say, oh my God, what is your father-in-law going to say? What is your mother-in-law going to say? Because the social connections and interaction are also linked to innovation. So the kind of innovativeness and business that came in Uganda, for instance, or East Africa, or even the whole of Africa, was linked to supporting your enterprises and innovations in England, in France, in Belgium. So the Indians who came to East Africa, for instance, came to build the railway. They were the poorest of people. But they found, because there was new things which we didn't know, if they brought a new cloth, because the wife of a preacher, the converted, actually had this cloth which was soft and nice, they would actually give you a teaspoonful of sugar. You lick it and it's sweet. For us, we were eating sugar cane. We didn't need to actually, we didn't need to process the sugar. Now, all of you don't want processed foods. You come back to us and we teach you what it is to eat things as they are, and that is the new business of tomorrow. Packing that sugar cane, putting it under fire and roasting it. You would never taste anything like that anywhere, because we who remained with nature are the ones who know how to do that. And this is where the programs that are coming online are now opening our minds, unleashing our forgotten innovativeness in supplying the world with ideas long forgotten before now. So Idi Amin came and chased away the Indians. They went, and people lined up to get shops. I remember I was still in secondary school when he took over, I think class 13 or 14. And a cousin of mine had a husband who was a cab driver, and he lined up and he was given a textile factory, which was making beautiful shirts, and there were these Celica vehicles, red and sleek. And all the young men in the clan, they all ended up in the buildings which belonged to this factory and everything. They had no knowledge of how to manage the factory, nothing. You just line up and things are allocated to you. We see the consequences of what donation does. Somebody comes, gives you a donation, it killed the innovativeness of a generation of young people who could have actually been good businessmen and women. So the culture of getting things for free did not actually start with the colonial times. They may have come as a consequence of stunting our innovativeness at the time when we were already organized, but that, I believe, is a mistake in time, just like the financial crisis of today. And what do we learn from that? We in Uganda have learned from that. We had the wars, the killings, which are not akin to Africa only. But in Uganda, we believe that has unleashed our innovativeness in a time when everybody thought we were a goner. As I speak now, countries like Tanzania, which have never had turmoil since independence, countries like Kenya, which until the recent post-election chaos came, they never had much chaos. Uganda's GDP per capita has actually surpassed those two countries right now. This despite the fact that we still have problems in the north, where our children have been abducted and our resources are kept on keeping the citizens in that part of the country secure. This despite the fact that we've had problems with Congo, big influx of refugees who in Uganda we don't tell them, please don't move. You stay in the camp or you have to do this because we don't have national IDs. Everybody, black or white, you come and work there for as long as you want. And for us, we know this is talent. So we ask you to go back when you want to go back to your home. So you find that in Uganda, we are an example of the resilience of the African people. And to me, I believe that the resilience is also a result of our being able to spot opportunities for survival and for leaders to emerge who will innovate ways of organizing their people so that the entrepreneurship can thrive. So in Uganda, the role of leadership is really on concentrating on policy to ensure that you make it possible for the private sector to do what they need to do. We don't actually regulate telecommunications companies. We don't. We don't say you go to this section or that section. And when I'm in my village, which is 20 miles away from Uganda, I have an option of 7 companies to choose from, which is the cheapest in terms of internet on my mobile phone, which is the cheapest in terms of talk as I go, which is the cheapest for me to text. So I can choose to have 7, telephone sets, which are also very cheap, or to keep on changing my card so that I can decide this is the cheapest for me to receive a call from Kathy when she's telling me how many meetings I'm going to have in Sydney. So for me, I would like to say that what is lacking now to spur innovativeness and to unleash the entrepreneurial, how do you pronounce that word? What? Entrepreneurial. It is a tongue twister. It is what Mackenzie and Co. represent here. I joined the Hunger Project as a member of this board. I was invited to join it 10 years ago. And at the time, what was being done in Africa, which was visible, was a leadership prize for a president or somebody who has done something about ending hunger in their country. And for us, who joined the board with knowledge of what's happening in Africa, we've made a contribution to ensuring that what is happening and the success of the Hunger Project answers to the needs of the people in Africa. Leadership from the local level in Bangladesh has done that. Leadership from India has done that. Leadership from the indigenous communities in South America have also added to the success of what we are seeing today. And I believe that should be the way forward. That you make partnership with the indigenous people and not lift a train and visit program, because this is a World Bank project which was tested in the Philippines and then brought in Africa. Train and visit for extension workers. You train and visit this man. You train and visit. So the officials, the projects were couched in such a way that most of the money went to buying motorcycles for extension workers, paying their allowances, and just talking to the farmers with no inputs for the farmer. So it was a storytelling of hope for the future. I'm your educated son and daughter. You see, if you plant in lines, this will happen. But what is the improved seed? What is improved stock? Where are the roads? Where is whatever? Now, to me, as an African woman leader, I believe that women bring a new dimension to the unleashing of private enterprise, linkages between it and the social sector and government for us to be able to do what's necessary to promote development and the building of dignified human enterprise in Africa and other developing countries. I believe that if you know from the people what they need, things will work. I tell you, Peter, the first time when I was vice president, when I heard about the social entrepreneurship, was when I was asked to go and launch the vaginal condom. And I said, you know, I remember when I was still in the medical school and were promoting family planning, even an African woman, to even know what the inside of her looks like is a problem. Maybe the picture, even looking at the male organ, they would just shy away. Now I'm going to tell her to poke things in her, if I may say the word. Can you say it with me? Into her, no. So instead of first coming to find us, from us who are on the ground, and with the organs which they want us, the first thing I knew, I was invited. They first invited the president. Then he said, you know better about that organ, you go. So up to now, in my country, Uganda, it's the vaginal condom has not sold because they did not sit down to say, what is the culture in this part of the country? And it has not been one of the important issues in our fight against HIV/AIDS, because we knew it would take us too much time to explain. So we hit the nail on the head, and we said this thing is heterosexual, and we know you Ugandans love sex, so love carefully. That was the slogan. And then we also knew that if you zero graze some animals around the towns, you get more milk because you plant them grass and whatever. So we said, you men, you plant grass for your wives. And we used local sayings like ekitooke kifansalira, like the banana tree will look beautiful if you actually trim it, which means dress your wife so that she looks beautiful for you anytime, instead of going around looking for other women. So we actually knew what enterprise, what social enterprise would work in Uganda, and were able to carry the message forward. So finally, lack of data is a very, very big issue in Africa. And this is where we need partnerships. We have so many projects, and people talk about corruption. I remember even on the radio it came up. I said, how do you evaluate corruption? Corruption has been there many, many years before. Maybe now it's more because there's democracy and people talk about it. So how do you actually quantify this and say, this is the impact I expected from this project? When projects are just rolling in, with the bilateral agreements, bringing in phase one of this project to phase two of the other project, and there is no data to actually tell you what's happening. And I believe anybody who is an entrepreneur would like to know about demographic data. What kind of people do we have? How are they changing over time in terms of consumption, education? What kind of fields are they going in, so that we are able to actually extrapolate and say, if I bring an investment of this kind, social or not social, directly consumer, product or not, who is actually the final market? So even in social enterprise, we need that kind of information. And the Hunger Project has taken the leap forward because the evaluations of many NGOs, when they bring in people who are independent, they usually pay the people themselves, and when whoever pays the piper does what? This is English. Aha, plays the tune. You are using too much computer to remember your own proverbs. We use the proverbs quite a lot. So when I say that in Uganda, like whoever pays the piper, then I don't need to explain because it explains itself. But I can see my age mate here knows the proverbs, and it's also the role of us women to continue the proverbs moving forward. So McKinsey, embodied here by my brother, Michael, is in a better position to talk about why it is important for us to use data as evidence for policy for the policymakers so that we can get them to partner effectively with the non-governmental organizations. Politicians have very little time. A cycle of every 5 years in Uganda, whether at the local government or the national government. So we need a similar cycle of generation of data so that we are able to get people who are at the grassroots grow into this culture of knowing, you know, I should not make policy based on subjective information from the media. I should not really listen to stories, and it is this evidence which will continue to move us forward and make the case in countries where linkages between the NGOs and the government and private enterprise are, you know, trying to forge forward, because I know private enterprise really wants what is my profit. And for us who are more on the social impact side, we believe the profit is how far you've been able to get these people move forward. And we measure it in terms of, you know, how many hospitals are empty without children with diarrhea. That is the profit. If you have many of them going there to be treated, you have no profit at all. So I thank you very, very much for being here today, and to thank you for supporting social enterprise. And I believe that, you know, Kathy, thank you very much for linking me up with these ladies and gentlemen, because to me this tour is a tour that is going to help me make partnerships, not only for Uganda, but for Africa, because I'm the president of all women in Africa. So I'm the biggest president in the whole of Africa. Because the men have a few people, for me I have over 4, because the population is now 900. So I go to Egypt and the women are clapping. I go to any market, they stand up. And the men, of course, have to salute me. These are linkages which are going to really carry not only us, because we don't have policymakers sitting in this forum, but you are the ones who elect them. And we are the ones in a democracy to move policy and say, how do we actually move business forward after this financial crisis, which to you is maybe what we experienced, which was a matter of life and death some 20 years ago. I thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Speciosa. I must say that never in my wildest dreams did I believe that I would be able to stand at this lectern and talk about now recognising the symbolic importance to social entrepreneurship of the vaginal condom. And one of the proverbs I was brought up was always expect the unexpected, and I was glad that I had that proverb then. I'm delighted also that this important topic is now going to be taken up by our next speaker. who is Michael Rennie, the Managing Director of McKinsey and Company for Australia and New Zealand. Michael has worked on major change with some of the world's leading companies in over 15 countries. He has now also joined the board of the Hunger Project Australia. Please welcome Michael Rennie.
So Peter, thank you very much, and to Specios also thank you very much. I first came in contact with the Hunger Project about 5 years ago. I was living in New York. At the time I was leading McKinsey's global practice in organisation, and particularly organisation behaviour, which is all about how you can transform organisation performance. And of course, as part of that work, we'd been experimenting with some very sort of leading edge thinking, which was essentially to say that the way you, traditionally the way we'd look at transforming organisations was to do with a lot of hard levers, systems, process, structures, all these sort of things, and you'd create a context in which people would change their behaviour. And the big idea that the firm has been experimenting with over the past 10 years is how do you actually work with people's internal states, their mindsets, and also how they work as groups, and work on that first, and by shifting that and then doing the rest, you actually get much greater transformation. And of course, locally, a classic example of that was the work at ANZ with the Breakout program, which I led with John McFarlane over 3 to 4 years, where 30,000 people went through these sort of programs, these sort of mindset change programs. And that work was very successful and led to work throughout Australia. And then I went to New York and around the world. And at the time that I first came in contact with the Hunger Project, I'd worked in about 15 countries. We'd worked with the largest bank in Latin America, the biggest insurer in Mexico, the largest mining company in South Africa, and we'd, et cetera, over about 15 countries. And in all those places, we're working with this idea of how do you actually get mindset and behaviour change first before you actually do the rest. And we'd had extraordinary experiences and results. And so then my father called me up, and he's classic. I grew up in the outback of Western Australia, and he's a real old-fashioned sort of farmer. And he said, you know, Michael, I've met this wonderful woman. He called her this great chick, Kathy Burke, who's here in the front, and she's in this thing called the Hunger Project. It's the best thing I've heard of. He said, you're in New York. You've got to go to their ball. They have this ball. Next week you're going to the ball. I've already arranged it, sort of thing. So I already had a commitment. I was working, you know, up in Boston, and I flew down, and my wife came in, and it was the classic, you know, I came in late. She left my, you know, black tie at the concierge. I got changed in the bathroom, and, you know, I sort of come into this ball. I walk into this room. It's already happening, and there are 2,000 people in this room, and about 1,600 of them are women, and mothers and daughters mostly. And I tell you, it was one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life. I can still remember the feeling of walking into this room, which was the first time ever in my life I'd been in a room that was more women than men, and the feeling, the energy, the whole feeling of it was, because I'm quite a sort of sensitive person, it was wow. It was just extraordinary. And I had the feeling of, you know, this is what I'm experiencing is sort of the future today. And you know, in my work, I've run workshops all over the world, and the only experience I've had close to it was at the Bank of Montreal in Canada, where, I don't know whether you know this, but 45% of the top 300 people in the bank are women. And it was only in the third workshop where I was doing leadership work with that bank that I thought there's something a little bit different about these workshops. And I suddenly thought, hang on, there's like half women and men. And it's like not just one workshop, because it sometimes happens, it's all of them. And then I started trying to find out. So that was a similar experience, but not quite as powerful. And I then started to understand what the Hunger Project did. And essentially what they do is they go into these small villages in places like Uganda, and rather than throw lots of money, you know, the donor sort of model, they actually spend the first year with these people they call animators, who are sort of locally trained facilitators. In business we call them facilitators, who come in and work with individuals and groups to get people to change their mindsets and the way they work together. And in particular, they work with women. So in a lot of these places, all the decisions are made by men, and the women do a lot of the work, but the men make a lot of the decisions, and the women aren't asked. And the first thing they do is they get the men and the women together. They set the women in the front row, and they essentially ask them all. And you see these wonderful sort of moments where the women are all looking down, and, you know, after 2 days, it's completely changed. And they're up there, and they're on the board, and they're They're being asked for the first time. And they essentially, these animators who are locally trained people, take these people on a journey, and particularly the women on this journey of actually being full participants in understanding what actually creates hunger in their local situation and how they can together, band together to actually, improve their situation. Now, they don't throw it, no money comes in until, maybe a year into the whole situation where they've gone through this whole mindset change, right? And they call these workshops vision, commitment, action workshops, or sort of VCA workshops. Now, as I started to understand these programs, I realised it was exactly the same thing that we were doing in these large corporates at the leading edge of McKinsey's global thinking on, transformation in organisations was exactly the same thing, except we were doing it for $3,000 to $4,000 per person per annum, and they were doing it for $5 per person per annum and having similar impact. So, coming to the question of what can we learn from the social sector, this piqued my interest enormously because obviously, it was the same thing, and it was done with hardly any resources and with a tremendous impact, right? And so, it's one of the things that actually drew me over the next years to get more and more involved in the Hunger Project and understand how it works. So there's a big idea here, which I've been seeing both in our work in McKinsey in performance transformation organisations, and we're seeing in places like Uganda with the Hunger Project, is that the most powerful way to get change to happen is not to donate or push things at people or teach, but rather to actually help people self-discover their own limitations in their mindsets and shift those, right? And then actually help them to start to work together in groups to actually make change happen. Then what happens in the Hunger Project model is then you start to put some money in there. You start to help them build epicenters or build wells or start women's banks. So one of the most powerful things that's happened in Uganda is they then create these groups of 7 to 10 women who essentially borrow and create little businesses and support each other and pay it back. And these are women who haven't been able to handle money up until this point, right? So it's just it's like a tremendous, it's an unthinkable sort of transformation in their experience. And they're creating little businesses that start to actually become self-reliant. They start to be able to then pay for their daughters to go to school, which they never could because the daughters had to do the work, blah, 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 and the whole thing starts to shift. And you hear these stories again and again. And Kathy, I think later might talk a little bit more about where the Hunger Project works and what it does. But essentially, and I think that's what Speciosa has spoken about in her tour around Australia, about how powerful it is to move away from this sort of donor model. And the business analogy of that is how powerful to move away from a teacher model, the doctor who knows better, who teaches you what change you need to have, to actually a facilitation model where you work with people's inner realities in their inner lives. You invest in that. Now, the way that the Hunger Project does this so cheaply is that they invest in that. But then they take the people who are the most excited and most capable of that group and they train them to be animators, and then it keeps going on. And so they've created this model that actually keeps going on. So what can we learn? What can leading edge business learn from the social sector? In this case, that model of the trainers training the trainers is something that I've taken on. And we've now, because at first you say, oh, that can't happen because these people who run these things are highly skilled people and you can't do that and blah, 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 and, psychologically trained, et cetera, but actually when you actually step back and say, okay, let me challenge that, because I've seen it work here, let me challenge that, you find that you can challenge that. And there's an 80-20 at work here, and you can 80% of what you need by actually creating this sort of self-generating model within organisations. So suddenly now we're starting to do those things thanks to that experience. And so traditionally you'd say, well, what can McKinsey learn from villages in the third world? Nothing. What can we learn? And it's coming to your point about innovation, the unleashing of innovation and what we can learn. So that's the first thing. The second thing, which has been a great privilege for us, is as we started to get closer to some of these stories, a whole number of people in McKinsey, and particularly women, said, I want to come and help in some way. And Speciosa and others said the way you can help is to come and evaluate these programs and tell us what's working. Be an independent evaluator. Give us the data. Give us the data that we don't have. And do it in a McKinsey way. As you know, we're the crack troops of sort of analytical Western capitalism. So it's one thing we can do is we can take something apart. And as Speciosa says, look, you know, the numbers are all great, but she sees it on the faces of the people. But we can put that into numbers to some degree. So last summer we had 10 women from around the world at McKinsey all head to Uganda and actually took the whole thing apart and rebuilt it and came up with an extraordinary set of results, which was essentially that the Hunger Project model, which focuses this engine of sort of vision, commitment, action, and the animators and the sort of internal change first model, actually, if you compare it to the Millennium Village model, and we compared it to a whole series of them, which is one of the best, it's, you know, the Millennium Village model costs $72 per person per year to get results that the Hunger Project gets with about $5 per person per year. And once the Hunger Project leaves an area after 5 years, the thing keeps improving. Whereas in these other models, it tends to flatten because you haven't had the inner transformation, right? So there's a very, very powerful idea here that I just want to leave with all of you in this in the social impact area, which is that true transformation has to begin. We say in our practice in McKinsey that organisations don't change, people do. Right? You do not transform an organisation, you transform 4,000 people in the organisation, and then the organisation transforms. And equally, you don't transform Africa countries, you transform people, and you transform them from the inside. And that's where we should be investing. And in fact, it has, we know from and those who are interested, we're going to be putting the McKinsey results on the website soon, but it's one of those classic 100-page wonderful pull everything apart studies, but it's very, very compelling around just the power of this new engine. So I just want to leave you with that thought about how powerful internal sort of transformation is. The second area I think where we can learn a lot, and we are starting to, is taking Western leaders to visit places like these villages in Uganda and actually experience what leadership is like, where you have no resources and you have the sorts of challenges that they have, where they have essentially women who traditionally haven't even been able to handle money, and you want to start a bank. Now that's a challenge, right? So the ANZ Bank, for instance, recently with Kathy and the local organisation took 20 ANZ leaders on a sort of 90-day program, of which there was a week they took them to one of these experiences. Sorry? India. In India. Took them to India to have one of these experiences, and of course you can imagine what happens when you go there, and we sort of think, oh, change is hard in organisations, and I can't, so it's, and you go here and you think, you come back, and essentially what you come back with is, what's my problem? What is my problem? Because you look at what these people can achieve and the courage that they have, and Speciosa hasn't told any of your stories about being a doctor and what it's like to be a doctor without any anaesthetics and any equipment and the things that she's had to do, and you just come away feeling like courage is the first thing that you come away with, and a sense of inspiration, and that it's an enormous recalibration of what's possible, and I think that's something that we all need. And I know it's it affects me enormously when you go and have this experience and you come back and you think, what is my problem? Just get out there and just do it. I don't need lots of resources. I don't need So I think there's a second thing which we can learn, which is that just an enormous sort of recalibration of what is possible in terms of courage. And when I think of Speciosa, and having heard you earlier today talk, 4 words: courage, intelligence, this innate innovation that comes, and people just trying things they've never tried before. Like women who never handle money can start a bank. Ridiculous concept, actually, when you think about it from that point of view, how far away that is in terms of change and transformation. And try to compare that with something we do, right, in an organisation. So I'd say courage, intelligence, inspiration, and finally heart. Right? And the last thing you come away with when you have these experiences is just the enormous heart that people have. And if there's one thing that we need in business and we need in sort of organisations today, it's actually heart. It's heart. And that's what you need to have great customer service, and that's what you need to be able to work with